This is how to teach synchronous classes when your object is to teach content. This slide deck is going to cover what you need to be prepared when giving a synchronous class. And we're talking about technology, simply what you need to have at hand, pre-work that will need to be done before you enter the Zoom classroom with students. We're going to go over just some general Zoom classroom guidelines, and then finally the elements and or steps for giving a synchronous class in Zoom. So first off, let's just go over the definition of what synchronous means. If you're giving a synchronous class, this is an interactive class where students and teachers are both present in the same virtual space at the same time, and everything is happening in real time. There's also going to be an expectation that there will be interaction between the person teaching and the student. More expectations of a synchronous class. Everything in the world, it should be exactly like it is in your face-to-face classroom. And that is a bold-faced lie because it's going to be definitely different. But your purpose is going to be giving the students what they need to continue their learning, to deepen their learning of existing subjects, and maybe even teaching new content through this. So when you're giving a synchronous class, the expectation is that content will be delivered through a visual of some kind. Slides, like you're seeing in this. You may also be screen sharing. Now, I am sharing my screen in Zoom. That's how you're seeing my slides. But when we talk about screen sharing, I'm talking about working someone through actual different browsers on your computer. Maybe you're showing them how to do something on the computer itself. And then finally, you could also be having a video of yourself if you'd like students to see you as you deliver the content. That's an option as well. No matter what, they're going to be looking at something on the screen. This is not a podcast. Classes should include the teacher speaking if it's synchronous. You're asked when you enter the Zoom if you want to have audio or not. You do want to have audio. You should be speaking. Students, however, will not be speaking. They're going to interact with you and with a second teacher in the classroom via a chat box in the Zoom classroom. Finally, the class will be recorded. We don't know that all students will be able to attend the class live. And in addition, we want students to be able to come back to the classroom, listen to anything that they feel unsure about, reference it again. We want to have record of the class that was taught. So, pre-work, what do you need to do before you can give your class? So first things first, you should know that a Zoom class has a 40-minute limit. Woo! And that timer starts from the minute you enter the classroom. Take a deep breath, take it in. What do you need to be prepared? First off, we're suggesting that there be 2 teachers in the Zoom room. One will be giving instructions, like me. That's what I'm doing. This will be you if you're the primary teacher. You're going to want a second teacher in the room who will monitor the chat box, because remember, that's where the student interaction is happening. They're going to answer any student questions that they can. And more importantly, they're going to call attention to the teacher giving instruction when further explanation is needed for the subject. Because if you're like me right now, all I can see are the slides on my screen. So if you were a student typing in a chat box, it wouldn't be able to see that. We're relying on our second teacher to reach out to us and let us know when we need to pivot in our game plan. You also want a lesson plan that both teachers have access to. That second teacher is fairly involved in this. They need to know the content to answer questions, and they need to have a lesson plan, even if it's just a rough outline, to know where you are in the class. Because if it's taken you 15 minutes to explain something that you had down for about 5 minutes, they're going to want to give you a heads up. Finally, that visual content. Again, this can include slides, it can include sharing what is on your screen, or it can be a live video of yourself. All right. So some Zoom classroom guidelines, and this is just across the board. No audio or visual for students. Now, you're thinking to yourself, but I wouldn't need the second person if the students could just talk. As someone who did this for 4 years of their life, I'm here to tell you, I have come to this rule of no audio or video for a very good reason. Audio is glitchy. Microphones cause feedback that can have the entire class covering their ears. It is not a distraction you want in the middle of a time crunch. And finally, people never know when to turn it off. So you get echo, you get feedback, and sometimes you hear things that you wish you hadn't heard. You may also be thinking, but seeing my students sounds nice. And it does sound nice. However, handing off between screens is a little bit more advanced of a maneuver, plus it takes time away from the class. There's always going to be a lag when you transition from screen to screen. And we need to be sensitive to our students. They may not be prepared to allow the entire class a view into their home. And finally, again, like the audio, it can be glitchy. Another rule is that the second teacher is in charge of the classroom. They're the person who will navigate tech issues on the student side. They'll let you know if there's tech issues on your end. Nobody can hear you. We can't see what's on your screen. They're the person that's going to be out there in that classroom and let you know what the view is from the audience perspective. They're going to be the person who's answering questions in the chat box. They're going to be going back and forth and keeping students engaged. And finally, they're the person who's going to contact the primary instructor if a student has a question that needs verbally addressed for the whole class. So, are you ready? It's class time. Let's talk about time management for a second. You have 40 minutes total in the Zoom classroom before it's going to cut you off. And by cut off, I mean it's literally just going to go dead and cut you off. I suggest that you plan for 20 minutes of content. Yep, I said it, 20 minutes. You may be asking yourself, why? That's only half the amount of time Zoom allows me. Well, it's going to take a little longer to teach the content than you think. It will also take students time to get into the classroom and be ready to learn. And finally, you want to allow time for students to ask questions, both within the class content portion and at the end. The first step is hitting record the minute you get into the classroom. I'm going to say it again. Hit record. When you enter a classroom, there are 2 steps that you should take for every synchronous class you give. The first one is, say it with me now, hit record. You want to make sure that later when you rename your title, that you still include the date that you give the screencast. Or I'm sorry, not the screencast, but the Zoom class. This way students can keep track of when content was handed out in case that they are doing something in reverse or they want to go back and reference a class that you've given online. Next, it's a good idea to write a question in the chat box for students. This can be anything from, what's it like at home for you today? What Netflix are you binging right now? To an actual do now. Remember that 10 minutes at the beginning of class and 10 minutes at the end of class that MBE teaches us still applies to an online class. So in addition to potentially starting up that learning for our students, the writing of the question in the chat box has other functions. You want to check that students also have full use of Zoom. Are they able to use the chat box? Are they having any issues when they come into the room? You yourself want to be talking as students are entering the room. The first question they're going to have is, can I hear anything? If you have radio silence on your end of things, Students are going to get a little anxious that they don't have full access in Zoom. Finally, both the talking and the chat box questions are going to be a nice way to bring a personal touch to the virtual experience. Next, I want us to remember that this is an interactive session. So during class time, you're going to want to make sure that you pause for student understanding. And remember, students are responding in the chat box. Typing takes longer than talking. You want to make sure that you are giving your students enough of a pause to allow them to formulate a thought and type it into the chat box. You also want to include formative assessments. So you want to ask your students questions during class and have them then respond in the chat box. This is the one time that we're asking the primary teacher to take yourself away from a full screen slide, a full screen video of yourself, and be able to see that chat box in the Zoom classroom. You want to be able to see that your students are responding. And even though we can assume that all students are able to see the chat box, if they themselves are responding, they're probably not reading everyone's responses as you write. So you want to verbally reiterate student answers for the entire class. Now, I'm not about to say that you're going to verbally reiterate every single solitary answer that comes in through that chat box, but you can pick out one or two to reiterate to the class, read them out loud, and then, as you would in a normal classroom, add on to it. Do you have anything, any extension, any praise, any check for understanding that you can add to that student's response? And remember to keep an eye on the chat box because they may respond to you as you're verbally responding to them. Keeping up that interaction makes it feel human and also keeps the students engaged. Finally, remember, you need to leave time for questions at the end. This may mean cutting your lesson a little short if you have to. It's vitally important that you allow students to ask their questions at point of need in the online classroom. Otherwise, it could have been done asynchronously.